Hi, this is the second podcast I'm doing on Acts 1. And last week I did Acts 1, 1 through 5. And then today I want to do Acts 1, 6 through 11. So in Acts 1, 1 through 5, the author of Acts, we'll call it Luke, even though technically it's anonymous. Luke says, I gave you one book before, the book of Luke, and now I'm giving you a second book. And the previous book talked about all the things that Jesus began to do. And now the implication seems to be, I'm going to tell you about the things he continued to do through the Holy Spirit. Some have called the book of Acts the Acts of the Holy Spirit. Certainly it is more the Acts of the Holy Spirit than the Acts of the Apostles. Mentions Jesus appearing 40 days and giving proofs to his disciples. And so those verses end with a reminder of the promise to John the Baptist that there would be one who would come after John the Baptist who would baptize in Holy Spirit instead of water. And this is where we come into verse 6. Therefore, on the one hand, those who had come together were asking him, they were asking Jesus, saying, Lord, at this time are you going to restore the kingdom to Israel? This is a reminder to us that the kind of Messiah that we know Jesus to be is not the kind of Messiah, in my opinion, that the disciples were expecting. The disciples, and for that matter, not all Jews were expecting a Messiah at all, but those Jews that were expecting a Messiah were expecting a human king, anointed by God to be sure, but a human king to come and overthrow the Romans and to restore the political independence of Israel. They weren't looking to take over the world. They weren't looking for spiritual transformation of all things. There was a belief in the resurrection of the dead, but as far as I can remember, the resurrection of the dead wasn't conjoined with the idea of a Messiah coming. There were other people who people wondered if they were a Messiah. Judas the Galilean, Theudas, an Egyptian. Later there would be Simon Bar Kokhba in the 130s AD. And my first instinct when I found out about this was to think, well, they're obviously not God come to earth, but the Jews weren't expecting God to come to earth. They weren't expecting the Messiah to be an incarnation of God, or even to be an angel for that matter. There might be one obscure Dead Sea Scroll that might anticipate something like this, but I don't even think that's the case. They were looking for a human to overthrow the Romans. And to restore Israel politically. So they were not expecting Jesus to die. Does not compute. They weren't expecting Jesus to die, and they weren't expecting him to rise again, which is, of course, an argument for the historicity of the resurrection, because that was not something they were thinking were going to happen. And so when Luke tells us of them saying to him, Lord, are you going to restore the kingdom to Israel now? It shows they still are thinking earthly, politically. It's kind of like, okay, wasn't expecting the death, or wasn't expecting the resurrection. Are we back on for the kingdom of Israel? And Jesus, but interestingly here, and he said to them, it is not for you, it's not for y'all, it's plural. It's not for y'all to know the times and the seasons that the Lord has placed by his own authority. This is not a no, by the way. Jesus doesn't say you're completely off. It's now a spiritual kingdom, or it's now the church. Now, by the way, I'm not going Zionist on you. I basically think the New Testament is indeterminate on those sorts of issues, but it is notable here, and we might talk about this a little bit more on the commentary I do on Saturday. On Saturdays, I do a deep scholarly, or at least a deeper dive into the passage, into scholarly considerations, but that's by subscription. But you notice here, he doesn't say that's wrong. He doesn't say there's never ever going to be a kingdom of Israel again. I actually do think that Luke Acts expects Jerusalem eventually to be restored to Israel. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that on Saturday. But he says it's not for you to know the times and the seasons that the Father has placed by his own authority. But you will receive power. And here's the key verse of Acts for me. Now, there are others who would consider there to be other structures to the book of Acts, but at least by one structuring of the book of Acts, we have a little Acts in a nutshell in this verse. You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you. You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria and into the end of the earth. This is a nice little map of the book of Acts from one perspective. Acts 1 to 7 is in Jerusalem. Acts 8 through 12 is in Judea and Samaria. And then Acts 13 through 28 is to the ends of the earth. And of course, the power they receive, we see a number of manifestations of power. After Pentecost, which is in chapter 2, they do miracles, they heal, healings take place. They have boldness, and so there's the power of boldness that I sometimes wish I had more of. Then there's they speak in tongues, which is certainly, whatever that is, it's certainly a manifestation of power, and we'll talk about tongues as we get into chapter 2 and beyond. So that, to me, is kind of the key verse. What are they witnessing to, by the way? They're witnessing to the resurrection. That's what makes them apostles. They have witnessed the risen Christ, and they testify as sent ones, as apostles, to the resurrection. And after saying these things, with them watching, he was taken up, and a cloud took him away from their eyes. And as they were paying attention, as they were held fast, as they were looking intently into the sky, attending to the sky, with him going, behold, 2 men had appeared to them in white clothing. This is interesting. If from one perspective, this is Jesus stooping to their weaknesses, because heaven ain't up. Heaven isn't straight up. They of course, this is an interesting thing. They thought that, at least this is what Jews thought, as from what we could tell, is that you have a relatively flat earth, probably, and then you go up through layers of sky. There's one Jewish document that has 7 skies, or 7 heavens. Word for sky and the word for heaven, it's the same word. It's not 2 different words. In English it is, but not in Greek. And so in one, I think it's the Ascension of Isaiah, has 7 heavens. The Testament of Levi has 3 heavens, or 3 skies, first sky, second sky, third sky. This seems to be Paul's kindergarten version of the universe. He says in 2 Corinthians 12, is it? He was taken up into the 3rd sky, into the 3rd heaven. So Jesus stoops to their weakness. Heaven, at least God is in some other place, because he created the universe out of nothing, right? So God must be somewhere else entirely from this universe. And so if we go to be with God in that sense, it's got to be outside of this cosmos. There are other possibilities. Maybe I'll talk about it on Saturday. But so this is, and of course the earth is rotating. So this is stooping to their weakness. It's kind of like they think heaven's up. That's where I'm going. I'm going to help them out here. I'm going to go up. And then after he's clear of the clouds and cut, now he goes off to whatever dimension, other dimension that heaven's in. But when he's gone, then 2 angels, I assume that's who these are, 2 angels appear to them in white clothing. That's a telltale sign. If you see someone in white, you might go ask them if they're an angel. And they say, "Men, Galileans, why are you standing here looking up into the sky?" This Jesus who was taken, be interesting, by the way, I do a verse of Greek a day also in conjunction with this. So when we get to verse 11, there's a nice little present for verse 11 in the Greek. And they said, "Men, Galileans, why are you looking in the sky? The same Jesus who has taken up you into the sky will come again in the same way you have beheld him going." And so he will come again. So there is our little overview of the 6 verses for this week from Acts 1, 9 through 11. And we'll see you again next Sunday for the next paragraph. Or if you want to join us for the Greek and the commentary on patreon.com.